Joining me now, ESPN senior writer Adam Rittenberg. Adam, thanks so much for taking a couple minutes to preview the college basketball season and go over some top headlines with me.
Oh, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with this conference realignment that I think has everybody's head spinning ahead of the 2024 season. This is wild now with the way things have shifted. What are the potential implications of this in the college football landscape to have so many lopsided conferences now?
Right. Yeah, I think 2024 is just going to be a huge year in college football. We already knew that it was going to be the introduction of the expanded playoff. We knew that USC and UCLA were coming to the Big Ten, Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC. But now with this latest round of realignment, there's a lot more movement on the way for 2024. The Big Ten will be an 18-team conference. I wouldn't even call it a league at this point. It's more of a blob or a conglomeration. And we're really in the age of sort of consolidation in the sport where, instead of having all of these leagues that matter, there's fewer and fewer that really do. And I think it will eventually reach a point where you're going to have a top division of sorts, almost an NFL style system at the top of college football. But 2024 certainly meaningful because of all the movement. Who knows what'll be left of the Pac-12? The Big 12 is obviously getting bigger. The SEC right now is at 16 with Texas and Oklahoma, and the Big 10 will be 18, which is just amazing to think about. When I started covering that league in particular, it was an 11-team league, and it had been 11 teams for more than 20 years, and now it's up to 18 over the course of 12, 13 years. It's pretty phenomenal.
Is it too early to try to understand what the potential playoff implications will be with all this realignment?
Well, I think it will be interesting to see what adjustments are made given what happened in the Pac-12. I don't think there needs to be a major adjustment. I think the spirit of the 12-team playoff was to gain more of a national representation of teams. Now, will what's left of the Pac-12 still have an automatic berth for its champion? That remains to be seen, but there will be at-large spots. There will be spots for the so-called non-Power Five, the Group of Five champions, and so there will be some access. But I think the goal, the commissioners that put this together, really wanted to have more access points as well as home playoff sites. I really think there's some value in the 12-team system that we don't have currently. But how will it adjust for some of these changes? And I still think the teams that are going to win the national championship have been the teams that have been winning the national championship, or at least competing for the national championship. But the access points, where teams will be coming from, who will be hosting playoff games, these things will all be exciting to watch here in the coming years.
Yeah, there has seemingly been a top tier of college football's best schools and conferences already for many years now. And I wonder how quickly we're sort of tracking to what you're describing, which is this sort of definitive line of demarcation between this is A and everybody else is 1A. When you analyze where this is going, how long do you think it will take before that line is drawn? Are we already there?
Yeah, I think we're already there in a sense, just because of the teams that have made their moves. What's motivated those moves? The fact that media companies that will be airing these regular season games and most likely the college football playoff games are very much involved in facilitating these moves. Whether it's ESPN, my employer, Fox has obviously been a big player in college football. CBS, NBC are also in that mix as well. So I think you can sort of follow the money, you can follow the movement of teams. But what's going to be interesting is when there is this acknowledgement that, okay, this is the group, right? And there's going to be teams that aren't in that group that are going to do everything they can to try to get in. And in some cases, Carolyn, it's not going to be necessarily about how good of a team you've been. And that's what I think that's what's hard for some people to accept. There's a lot of things that have been hard to accept, especially for those of us who grew up watching the sport in a very different format. But if you're a program that has been very successful, but maybe doesn't move the needle from a ratings standpoint, are you going to be left out of whatever it is in the future? I thought we'd still be a ways away from that, but I think given the events of the last two summers, we're a lot closer than I think I thought we would be. Maybe 18 months ago, 2 years ago. So when it happens, how it happens is anyone's guess. But I think the really interesting thing will be teams that maybe haven't been part or won't be part of the SEC or the Big Ten, that still would be worthy of being included in whatever that division is, and then also some teams that are in the SEC or Big Ten that historically wouldn't be a part of whatever that new division is.
It's just fascinating. You bring up such a great point where the value is. I mean, you always follow the money for many, many years in college football, but now to have the point of emphasis be, are you good for TV? Do you draw on ratings as opposed to, what would please a college football purist? I think that they've never been further apart. It's fascinating. I just want to kind of go around the college football landscape and hit a couple of main storylines. I'm wondering what the latest is on Jim Harbaugh's possible suspension with the latest scandal that he's been involved in. What are you hearing on that front?
Well, it was interesting. It looked like it was headed towards a negotiated resolution, and, with a 4-game suspension being the likeliest outcome for the situation that occurred over the last couple of years. And then that broke down, and so as of now, Jim Harbaugh is set to coach the entire season unless there's a accelerated timeline on a committee on infractions hearing. So when you negotiate a resolution, it's to avoid that. That now is on track to happen. It's just a matter of when, and most likely it won't happen until 2024. So there's a much better chance now that Harbaugh coaches the entire season for Michigan, but also a much better chance that whatever penalties he receives from the NCAA will be fairly severe. And again, the level 1 violation, which he's accused of, lying or misleading NCAA investigators, does come with a significant penalty. I was told 3 to 6 games. It might even be more than that. And the NCAA, given its statement that came out over the weekend, which they never issue statements about ongoing infractions cases, they're clearly upset with the narrative that's around this particular case, and it doesn't seem like they're going to go lightly on Jim Harbaugh, regardless of how it turns out. Now, there's all these other factors, though, to consider. I mean, this is a coach who's talked directly with NFL teams the last 2 off seasons, who sources believe he absolutely wants to be back in the NFL. When does that opportunity occur? Maybe it occurs after the 2023 season, and this is sort of a moot point. But if he is back at Michigan after 2023, most likely will be facing a significant suspension in 2024.
Seems like 2024 could potentially be explosive for a number of different reasons. And you've got this seismic shift taking place, not only with conference realignment, but name, image, and likeness, and what's the aftermath of all that. You've got legalized gambling now all across the country, and what's the potential impact of that. Not that those things haven't been there for many, many years, but for Iowa and Iowa State to be involved in this gambling scandal, I wonder if you are not only can kind of update us on what the potential fallout could be there, but also is that something that so many other schools are going to have to now be especially considerate of and careful with?
Yeah, it's amazing, Carolyn, because this normally would be the biggest story in college football. I mean, you have athletes now that have been accused of, and in some cases admitted to, gambling on events either at their own school, so other teams, or on events that they participated in. I mean, that's again, maybe not the first time it's ever happened. It certainly isn't in college athletics, but now because of the investigation in Iowa, because of the widespread access to these apps and the ability to wager even if you are underage, this is a big deal. And while for now it's confined to the state of Iowa because that's the state that initiated an investigation with its gaming board, this could certainly happen in other states. It could certainly happen to other programs and involve other college athletes, either making just general sports wagers on events that they really have nothing to do with, or on events that they absolutely have things to do with. And you look at going through the list of affidavits last week that were filed in Johnson County, which is where the University of Iowa is, or Story County, which is where Iowa State is. It was just stunning to see how many events were listed that the athletes are accused of wagering in that they participated in. So you already had one Iowa State player, Isaiah Lee, a defensive lineman, who's left the program. There's certainly a lot of concern that a number of other players at Iowa State will not even play this year because of this situation. You've had a couple of Iowa players that have transferred out of the school, one of whom has already been kind of suspended indefinitely as this is going on. So this is just the start, I think, of likely more of these cases, because we've had this surge of legalized wagering and apps, and access has changed a lot in the last few years. So to think this is only going on in the state of Iowa is pretty naive.
I was going to say, are leagues already behind the eight ball? You saw the NFL set out a set of guidelines: no gambling at the training facility. Obviously, can't gamble on games that players are directly involved with. It would be ludicrous to think that that wouldn't be happening at the college level. Do you think that other schools, other leagues are looking around and saying, "Hey, we need to immediately apply some kind of regulation here because this is a problem that is inevitably coming for us"?
Sure, but again, I don't know how you regulate it, right? I mean, if you look at those affidavits at Iowa, most of those athletes had their parents. They were wagering on their parents' accounts. There was one who was registered or was wagering on his fiance's account, or allegedly a friend. It's just so easy to do it, and so unfortunately, it's probably going to take a number of players losing their eligibility for coaches to say, "See, this is what can happen to you. You will get caught." You will lose your eligibility, even if you're wagering a fairly small amount. And at least the wagers that have been reported in the state of Iowa, it's not like they were wagering $10,000 on the under. They were fairly small amounts, but it doesn't matter because it's your event. And so there's certainly education around it, but as long as sports wagering is legal in those states and the access to those apps in particular is there, which we all have cell phones and we have friends who have cell phones, I don't know how you curtail this other than pointing to, don't become like this Iowa State player. Don't become like this Iowa player who lost his eligibility over a fairly small amount of money that was wagered on one of his events.
No, that's a great point. It seems impossible to fully monitor with how available it is all across the country. I think I'm not just saying this because I'm a Florida Gator, even though it's going to sound like I am, but I do think a lot of people are sick of Georgia at this point. And now they have seemingly, just continued to put themselves in position to win. It's fascinating to see 25 players over the last two drafts being drafted to the NFL. In what ways have they reloaded ahead of this season? Is it good for the sport to have a little bit more parity? Do you see any other teams that are potentially surprising that have done anything to put themselves in position to contend with some of these teams that we continue to see over and over again?
Yeah, I think the sport would certainly be well served by more parity, but it's difficult when you have a program in Georgia that's now achieving at its level. And that was not the case for a long time. I did a series a few years ago called Underachiever Tiers, and it was inspired by the fact I was turning 40. I had never seen Georgia win a national championship. And you talk to coaches around the country, as I do on a regular basis, many of them list Georgia as the best job in the country. So now it's the best job in the country that's actually reaching its potential. And that's the problem, is when Georgia's rolling, it's hard to catch them. And that's what is certainly in front of programs like Alabama and LSU in the conference, and Ohio State and Michigan nationally, USC. These programs are all chasing Georgia. It's very difficult, as you know, to win a national championship 3 years in a row in any sport, especially in football, but they are absolutely deserving, in my opinion, of the number one ranking in the preseason polls. They are the team to beat, even though they lose some great players, and they lost great players after the 21 team and still won a national championship. So absolutely, just like Alabama was most years, Clemson was for a little while, Georgia's, everyone's looking up at them. And because that job is such a great job with the access to talent, and now they have the supports in place to be able to compete and recruit nationally year after year after year, and they have the right coach, it's going to be difficult for a lot of programs to even compete with them regularly.
I mean, I think you just said it, and I think a lot of people who follow the sport closely probably know it, but it's safe to assume at this point that they have leapfrogged Alabama as the most legitimate title contender in the country. I mean, they've assumed that mantle quite thoroughly at this point, right?
Absolutely. And, Alabama has a lot of uncertainty going into this year, even though they've had a really great run of quarterbacks from, Jalen Hurts to Tua Tagovailoa to Bryce Young. There's really question marks about whether they can continue that. They have Tyler Buckner, who transferred in from Notre Dame after the spring to compete with Jalen Milroe and Ty Simpson. You have a new offensive coordinator in Tommy Rees, who came from Notre Dame, obviously knows Tyler Buckner. So how is that position going to shake out? How are they going to look defensively? Are they going to be as dominant along the line of scrimmage as they've been in the past? They're still recruiting at an incredibly high level. Their 2023 recruiting class was one of the best of all time. So it's not a talent issue. It's whether they can make it come together and ultimately catch Georgia, but also LSU. LSU is a team that's on the rise in their division, that won the division last year with a first-year head coach. So interested to see where Alabama's at after this season for sure.
Talking with Adam Rittenberg here, senior writer for ESPN, covers college football quite thoroughly, and just a couple more for you. But I just want to quickly remind everybody to subscribe to the YouTube channel that we're doing this on. Follow Adam for everything that you need for college football heading into this season. A couple more for you, and then I'll let you go. Curious about Michigan and USC and how you view their strengths and weaknesses heading into the season.
Sure. Well, Michigan, again, back-to-back college football playoff participant, back-to-back Big Ten champion, and they really return a lot of the pieces from last year's team. Quarterback J.J. McCarthy, running backs Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. They have some receivers back, some good pieces along an offensive line that's won national awards, and defensively, I think that some of the transfers that they've added should really help solidify that group. So they're the team to beat for sure in the Big Ten going into the season, but have never won 3 consecutive outright Big Ten titles in all of their history. And Ohio State's sitting right there and very, very motivated to beat Michigan. Penn State believes that it's got its best team, maybe since the 2016 Big Ten champion team. So that's going to be a fun race to see if Michigan can three-peat. USC, obviously Caleb Williams, the Heisman Trophy winner, is back, trying to become just the second ever multi-Heisman Trophy winner. And he's going to lead what looks like a tremendous offense again with some of the receivers that they have. The offensive line could be even better potentially than it was last year. The question there is defense, and we saw that at the end of last year, is that when they weren't taking the ball away at a high rate, they were kind of falling apart. And you saw that against Utah twice in the road game at Utah, but certainly in the Pac-12 championship game. And I think if USC does not get a playoff appearance out of Caleb Williams, it's going to be very disappointed because he's that good of a player, and they obviously have other quarterbacks that are ready to step in behind him. But before moving to the Big Ten in 2024, which is going to be a transition, and historically teams that move conferences don't do well right away. So this is a big year for Lincoln Riley. It's a big year for that program, which has never made the college football playoff, to get into the CFP, and then we'll kind of see where it goes from there.
This is such a fun storyline heading into the season. And there's obviously a reason just on Caleb why somebody hasn't won the Heisman since back-to-back since the 70s, because it's not easy to do. I mean, is he the type of player, defensive side, that could do something special enough to earn that title for the second year in a row?
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely could. He has got that ability. He's a guy that will be watched from start to finish. To see what he can do. He's the projected number 1 overall pick in the 2024 draft, and I think will be that unless he gets injured this year or there's some big drop-off in performance. So he's going to have to be even better, though. I thought he was not a memorable Heisman winner last year, to be honest. Had a great season, set a bunch of records, but if I think of like the most memorable Heisman winners in the last 10, 15 years, he didn't do what Johnny Manziel did. He didn't do what Robert Griffin did. He had a nice year. Joe Burrow had a more memorable Heisman year than Caleb Williams. So it's going to have to take that extra bit of production and just special moments, because you have a lot of contenders, and I think Heisman voters tend to want to give somebody else a shot, whether that's in the conference and Michael Penix and Bo Nix, or nationally, Drake May and Jordan Travis in the ACC. We'll see who emerges in the SEC. Marvin Harrison Jr. could be a strong Heisman candidate coming out of Ohio State as a top 5 projected pick. So he's going to have to be better, Caleb will, and I think ultimately get his team to the college football playoff, because he won that award last year in spite of losing to Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. I don't think that's going to be enough if he's to win the Heisman for a second year and just become the second to do so ever, joining Archie Griffin. So it's going to take a better performance than he had last year.
I'll get you out of here with this, Adam, and I so appreciate the time and insight, because there's so much to look forward to for college football fans this season. But what are you most excited about? It feels like, just talking to you, you can feel kind of the energy and excitement that you have around heading into this year, and there's so many interesting, complicated storylines. It feels like college football is in a really good place. It obviously generates a ton of cash. What gets you excited about this particular season? What will you be watching?
I think the collection of returning players is really exciting. Last year it was the coaches and how there had been movement around. Lincoln Riley, first year at USC. Brian Kelly, first year at LSU. Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. You have a lot more notable second-year coaches. Dan Lanning at Oregon. But this year it's about the star power, especially at the quarterback position. Pac-12 might be their last year ever in that form, but it should be a really entertaining year. Big Ten, Can Michigan three-peat? Can Ohio State challenge? And then the SEC, is it going to be Georgia? Or is someone else going to unseat them? Whether it's Alabama, LSU, I didn't bring up Tennessee, but Tennessee had a tremendous season last year. They bring back an exciting quarterback in Joe Milton. So it hasn't been the most fun offseason covering realignment, covering the hazing scandal at Northwestern. So I'm really excited just to have some games and different things to discuss.
Well, I appreciate it. And if you could just remind everybody, where's the best places to find you, find your work, follow you throughout the college football season?
Sure, you can follow me on social media, on Twitter or X at ESPN Rittenberg. Find all my work at ESPN.com, especially in the ESPN Plus section of the college football page. That's where a lot of my longer pieces go. But obviously, anything will appear on our main college football page and often on our front page.
Adam Rittenberg, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks for having me, Carolyn.